It's Sarah. Welcome back to my channel, or for those of you who are watching for the first time, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the last topic in my medical school application series, and that is medical school interviews. Now this is a really content-heavy topic, so I'm actually going to divide this into two separate videos. For this first video, I'm going to be giving a brief overview of the medical school interview process, and then I'll also be giving some tips and tricks about how to approach your interview day, ways to prep for it, and things to do and not to do while you're actually having your interview. And then the second video is going to be about MMIs, or multiple mini interviews. This is an interesting and unique interview format that some medical schools choose to use when interviewing applicants, and it's honestly probably unlike anything you guys have ever experienced before. So I'm going to dedicate an entire video to explaining what that interview format is and ways to prepare for those types of interviews. So for today, I'm just going to begin by explaining some facts about the medical school interview process. I think the main thing students ask me about interviews is, when am I going to hear about them? When am I going to get invites? You know, if I haven't gotten invites by this day, is my life over and will I not go to medical school? And I think the most challenging thing about the interview process is how unpredictable it is. I've had students who apply to medical school and have everything submitted by late July and don't hear anything from medical schools about invites until like December. And then I've had other students who also have all of their information in by the end of July and start getting invites as early as August. And so what I tell my students is that you can get interview invites anytime between about early August and late January. And just because you don't hear anything August, September, and October doesn't mean you're not going to get a ton of invites November, December, and January. And it can be really hard to be nervously waiting, refreshing your email, and just hoping an invite comes in. But I think the best approach is just take each day as it comes and realize that even if you don't hear anything initially, there is still plenty of time to hear things until the end of January comes up. And just because you don't hear anything August, September, and October doesn't mean you're not going to get a ton of invites November, December, and January. And it can be really hard to be nervously waiting, refreshing your email, and just hoping an invite comes in. But I think the best approach is just take each day as it comes and realize that even if you don't hear anything initially, there is still plenty of time to hear things until the end of January comes up. Another thing to know about medical school interviews is that they vary pretty wildly from school to school. And so as I kind of alluded to earlier, some schools use what's called an MMI format, which we'll talk about more, but it essentially involves a series of timed short interviews where you rotate between different stations, while other schools use a more traditional interview format. So maybe you'll have a 30-minute interview with a current student, a faculty member, and a doctor who works at the hospital associated with the med school. Or perhaps you'll have just a 45-minute interview with one faculty member. So there are definitely different styles of interviews that medical schools use, and it's really important that you figure out what the medical school you're applying to actually does before you show up that day completely unprepared for what's to come. And then the other thing to know about medical school interviews is that there is a lot more to your interview day than just an interview. So a lot of medical schools will actually have an evening before, like, meet and greet session where you'll meet with a bunch of current students along with fellow applicants at maybe like a restaurant near the medical school. And it's designed to give you a chance to have an informal conversation about the medical school with current students, to meet some of your fellow applicants, and just to take some of the tension and anxiety out of the actual interview process. And then the next day is when the interview day happens. And so obviously an interview is a huge part of that day, but there are other things planned as well. Many times interview days will include a tour of the medical school, oftentimes given by a current student. There might be a lunch where you dine with faculty members and ask them about their current research, or perhaps the dean of admissions will give you guys a long speech about things to know about the medical school, reasons why you should go there. And so just know that there's going to be more taking place than just the interview. And most of the other things that do take place are designed to give you a closer look into that medical school that you're interviewing at. A lot of students will ask me, do I need to go to that night before meet and greet session with current med students? If I don't make it to that for whatever reason, is that going to adversely affect my chances of getting into that medical school? And the answer is absolutely not. You do not need to go to that meet and greet session unless you want to and feel that it will be helpful for you. The students there are not reporting back to the dean of admissions about who went and who didn't go. That session is really designed just to make you feel more at ease during the interview day and to help you learn a little bit more about the school. I think they're a really helpful resource. I think it's great to get to know current students, but if going to that doesn't fit into your schedule, do not fret. No one is going to hold it against you if you're not able to make it. So that's kind of all I have to say about the general interview process for medical school. And now I'm going to transition into talking about tips and tricks for how to actually approach your medical school interviews. Tip number 1 is practice makes perfect. I've talked to students in the past who say, I've had interviews before, I feel comfortable talking to people. Do I really need to practice for these interviews? And the answer is a resounding yes. It's very unlikely that you've talked about medical school before in an interview setting where you've had to defend reasons why you want to be a physician or maybe talk about injustices in our healthcare system. And so I think that prepping for these interviews will make you more confident going in to talk about medicine-related topics and just to make you feel like you can really ace that interview. And then tip number 2 is kind of linked to that, and that is to either videotape yourself during a mock interview or have someone take notes during a mock interview on your habits and things that you're doing. It's not uncommon to have nervous habits during an interview. So maybe you'll tap your fingers on a desk, or you'll swivel around in a chair, or you'll shake your leg. And these are things that, although not really a negative reflection of you as a person, can be quite distracting to the interviewer and really take away from the quality of the interview. Other things like maybe saying and like all the time, or talking really, really quickly because you're nervous and you want to say everything you need to say, are also things to avoid. And so whether you're watching yourself on videotape or someone else is interviewing you in a mock way, have them look for these things. Have them look for anything that could detract from what you're saying and really from the interviewer's overall impression as you as a candidate. Tip number 3 is read over your application and any secondary essays before interviewing at a medical school. So a lot of interviews are open file, which means your interviewer can look at your application, they can read through your personal statement and secondary application, and so it's very common that they will pull questions they ask you from that content they read. And so if it's been 8 months since you've thought about your secondary essays, it's very helpful to brush up on them. And so if topics you discussed within those essays are brought up, those things are fresh in your mind and you're prepared to talk about them. Tip number 4 is educate yourself on the school you're interviewing at. I can almost guarantee you that your interviewer is going to ask, why do you want to go to this medical school? And if you aren't ready with a list of really good reasons why you want to go there, shame on you. You should have a lot of specific, solid, really good and convincing reasons why you want to go to that medical school. Because one of the things the interviewer looks at is how much it seems like you actually want to be there. How much it seems like that medical school is where you could imagine yourself being. And so I think it's really important to make sure you're thoroughly researching that medical school. You're aware of the curriculum. You're aware of course offerings and extracurricular activities. And you're aware maybe even of researchers that you can work with during your time as a student there. If you completed a why do you want to go here question during your secondary part of your application to that school, you can just obviously reference that and just remember those things that you wrote about in that essay. But at the end of the day, it's really important that you have convincing and specific reasons why you want to go to that medical school and are able to really articulate them well during an interview. Tip number 5 is prepare a list of questions. So most interviewers are going to ask you at some point during the interview if you have any questions for them about the medical school. And if they ask you that and you have no questions prepared, that is not going to shine a very good light on you as an applicant. And so my suggestion is prepare a list of generic yet really interesting questions that you can just use at every medical school that you end up applying to. For example, some of the things I like to ask were, what is your favorite and least favorite part about this school as a whole? Many people will ask the favorite part, but neglect the least favorite part. And I think that both sides of those questions can be really helpful and enlightening. Another question you could ask is, in the last 10 years, what has been the biggest change that has happened in this medical school? And do you think that has been a positive or negative change? The point is, I think it's helpful to have questions that can be asked at almost every medical school you go to so that you're not recreating a question list every time you have a new interview. But just make sure you're asking questions that are interesting and hopefully not the same questions that everyone else is going to be asking. Tip number 6 is practice commonly asked interview questions. If you go on Google right now and type in, common medical school interview questions, I guarantee you will get many, many lists of different questions that people commonly ask during these interviews. Go through them, read the questions, think about what your answers to those questions might be, so that when you actually are asked them during the interview day, you are ready with an answer that is well thought out. Tip number 7, dress properly. So it's really important that whether you're a male or a female, you're wearing a business formal outfit during the day of your interview. For men, this might be a suit with a tie. For women, maybe this is a business formal dress or a pantsuit. I think it's completely okay to have a pop of color in your outfit, whether that might be a light blue tie, or maybe for girls, it might be like a pink blouse under a blazer. But I think the important thing to know is, in general, make sure you're dressing modestly and you're not coming off as too over the top in your outfit. And then the other thing to keep in mind with your dress is wear shoes that are at least kind of comfortable. If your medical school takes you on a tour during the day of your interview, you might be walking for anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes. And so if you're a girl and you're wearing the world's most uncomfortable shoes, you're going to be miserable by the end of that tour. And so make sure that the shoes you wear are comfortable enough to walk in for at least a small period of time. Tip number 8. Bring with you a leather portfolio that has paper inside and a space to hold any documents they give you. I see students who bring nothing with them except maybe their phones in their pocket, and they're like dropping all the papers that sometimes med schools give. They're fumbling to take notes on their phone, which looks really bad. And I think having one nice, modern, sleek leather portfolio that has a notepad in it, can let you put some papers in the side, is gonna make you look really put together and prepared for your interview. And a similar token, avoid bringing a cell phone the day of your interview. I have only seen things go wrong when students bring cell phones. Whether it's that you forget to turn this volume off and it starts ringing during the director of admissions speech, or just perhaps you get distracted by it and you start looking and texting your friends when someone else is trying to talk to you. I think leaving a cell phone at home is your best bet, but making sure you bring some sort of leather portfolio is a good rule of thumb. Tip number 9, be early. I have students who plan to get to their interview day 5 minutes early, and they're like, well, that's good. I'll be 5 minutes early. If something goes wrong, I'll be right on time. And 5 minutes is not nearly enough time to allow in case things go wrong. Think about it. You have worked at least 4 years to get into medical school. You do not want to blow your chances away by arriving to your interview late because you hit traffic, or because you couldn't find parking, or because, your phone died and you didn't know how to get to the school. It is so, so, so important that you allow, I would say, between a half hour and an hour extra, just so that if anything at all goes wrong, you are not going to end up late at your interview. Tip number 10 is treat everyone you meet with respect. That includes the security guard outside the building. That includes the secretary at the admissions office. And that includes the janitor who is cleaning up after your lunch. It's really important that you show respect to every single person you interact with on your interview day. Because the fact of the matter is, if someone sees you treating someone else with a lack of kindness or respect, that is really just going to hurt your chances of getting into that school. And so don't just be nice to your interviewer, be nice to everyone you run into. The next tip is weave in anecdotes to your interview. A lot of the questions your interviewer will ask you could either be answered very straightforwardly and basically, or could be embellished with stories about your own life. Let's say they ask you why you want to go to that medical school. You could just rehearse a number of reasons why you like that medical school and not really give any fun personal stories. Or instead, you could tie in a few stories that are relevant to the reasons you like that medical school that not only answer their question, but also show some new and unique sides of you. Tip number 12 is avoid controversial topics during your actual interview. Now, there are some rules somewhere where interviewers are supposed to avoid talking about controversial topics, but unfortunately that doesn't always happen. My advice to you is if they bring up something controversial or ask a question that could be answered in a controversial way, do your best to avoid talking about controversial topics. Even if you feel like you really have gotten the vibe of your interviewer and know exactly how they feel about something, the fact of the matter is you don't really know those people at all, and you don't really know how they view different topics. And so to avoid any tension, I strongly recommend just avoiding topics that are controversial. And then my last and final tip is for when your interview day is finished. And that is write thank you notes to all of your interviewers. It makes such an impression if they receive a handwritten note from you that says, "Hey, so-and-so, thank you so much for the interview. I love talking about X, Y, and Z," and then actually reference things you talked to them about. "It was so lovely meeting you, and I really enjoyed your insight into blank and blank medical school. Warmly, your name." I think that that sets a really good impression. It shows gratitude and appreciation for that person's time. And honestly, it just makes them have a positive impression of you and a positive memory of their time with you. And so those are my top tips for how to ace your interview day. I hope they were helpful. If you have any questions about interviewing for medical school, either comment down below or send me an email. My email's in the description box. If you learned anything at all from this video, please do like it and subscribe to my channel if you want to learn more tips and tricks for the medical school application process. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.